Hi, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today I want to talk to you about those hardy roses for cold winter climates, and as I go through my selections here, I'll be focusing on those that are rated down to USDA zones 3 and 4, roughly speaking. I'm going to go through some groups here. I've got some great ones to discuss. The Rugosas, some of the old garden roses of Europe, Canadian bred roses. I'm very excited to talk to you about those. I'll put those up as chapters right now of what the groups I'll be talking about. Let's get right into them. Owing to their excellent garden qualities, I think the right place to start is with Rugosa roses like this one here. The species itself is the wild beach rose of Japan and Korea and is hardy down to zone 2, as is all the near hybrids like this one, Rosary de la Haye. Getting a closer look at the foliage and flowers here, I thought you'd have a look at the texture on the leaves. That's kind of a rugged or rugose pattern on the leaves, which adds to its ornamental value. I think the flowers are nicely scented and repeat flowering, which is unusual for a wild rose. You can, of course, remove the spent flowers for a faster return to bloom, or you can leave them on there and get these large red or orange hips that are fantastic for eating. In fact, the best rose hips for eating, making this just a multi-purpose shrub. This one being quite large and pink, but also comes in a range of other colors. This is a variety called snow pavement, and with a name like snow, I guess you'd be tempted to call it white, but it actually is, in my view, a light pink or lilac with one of the finest fragrances in all of roses when I put my nose to it. The color range of the Rugosas does tend to center around purple, pink, and white, this one being a variety called purple pavement, in the same series as the snow pavement I just showed you, which are kind of a lower growing Rugosa, up to an average about 4 feet, whereas there are taller Rugosas that can go up to 6 or 7. Once again, to expand that color palette, this one is called Topaz Jewel, pushing it into yellow. There's also another old variety called Agnes. The next group to profile are the old garden roses, those old romantic roses that have been used for centuries in perfume and for culinary purposes all over Europe and the Middle East, and revered for their use in rosewater and perfumes. This one here is the original damask rose called Kazanlik. Now you'll note it's not in bloom right now, and this is kind of typical of the old garden roses, as I'm going to say. They predate modern breeding, and so they bloom once in the spring, and then they put all of their energy into hardening off and getting ready for winter, making them exceptionally hardy. I'm going to have to fill in this portion of the video with lots of vids and pics from elsewhere just to give you an idea of what they look like. So I mentioned this as a damask rose. Another group to look at that's super hardy are the Alba roses, including Great Maiden's Blush, a wonderful pick in that group that is hardy, I think, down to zone 2 or zone 3. I'll put those on the screen as well. The Gallica roses are a good group to look at. The Apothecary rose is an example of that, often used for medicinal and herbal use in the Middle Ages, and still a wonderful garden shrub. Most of the old garden roses I could feature in this video are one-time bloomers, meaning they only bloom in that late spring to early summer period, but this one's a little different. You can see it's in bloom today here. Even in late summer, this is probably its 3rd flush of blooms in the garden. It's called the Jacques Cartier, and it's part of a group called the Damask Perpetuals, or the Portland Roses. And I could also feature in this one I love a lot is called Sidonie. I'll put in a picture of that. It's a slightly more tidy bloom form than, say, Jacques Cartier here, and also Rose de Recht, which I like an awful lot. Another group that you could look at just very briefly, and I'll put in some pictures here, is the centifolias or moss roses. They also are just once blooming, but they tend to have a longer bloom period than the rest of the old garden roses, and they include such wonderful specimens as Chapeau de Napoleon or Gros Chou de Hollande. Well, if Canadians have a source of national pride, it might run more towards hockey or, say, national heroes like Terry Fox. We actually have something to be proud of in terms of our contributions to rose breeding. This rose here is called Isabella Skinner. It hasn't been available in the Canadian market for a number of years, but wonderful, and let me run down its benefits. One, it's fragrant, it's a climber, and it's reblooming. All those things, repeat blooming fragrant, and a climber all on one rose that's hardy down to zone 2 or 3, and that's typical of many of the Canadian roses. You're going to find the Canadian roses sold in a few different series. There's going to be members of the Parkland series like Winnipeg Parks. You're going to find things in the Canadian Artists series like Bill Reed, and other ones that talk about the explorers, things like John Davis or Henry Kelsey, both of which also are repeat blooming climbers, and Henry Kelsey has a good fragrance. This variety is called Olds College. It was never officially released by Agriculture Canada, but it is a beautiful rose, really nicely scented, sort of matches the charm of the David Austin roses when it blooms with more petals. Here it's showing the more traditional sort of hybrid tea form to it, but repeat blooming, very hardy and fragrant, and I think its only problem is that it sometimes suffers from powdery mildew, but many do. This healthy little guy is Laconigan Lucia, and it's a new addition to my collection in the child garden from the breeder Kordes, and it gives me a chance to tell you about Kordes as a breeder because they've been involved in breeding hardy roses for generations now, and one of their introductions that's super old but well known is Iceberg, a floribunda that's much hardier than the class, I would say, at zone 4, but also climbers like Laguna or Westerland, one in pink and the other one in a bright orange. And again, the classic climbers if you're going to choose something that is very hardy. And I should finish off the video just by giving some attention to the species or wild roses and their near hybrids. This one here is called Rosa glauca or Rosa rubrifolia, depending on who you ask. And as promised, I did chop down the big one I have out in the field for rejuvenation pruning, but this one's still doing wonderfully, and it gives me a chance to show you that it's bloomed and it is putting up nice fruit, even here in a shaded position. So it's adaptable to that and also hardy to zone 3. Harrison's yellow is extremely well known for being hardy and grown all across North America, Texas, Alberta, so into those difficult climates. And I will show you, as I'll throw in a shot here, of the Scots Rose, Stanwell Perpetual, which is hardy to zone 3 as well. Beautifully fragrant and a repeat bloomer, even though it's a near species or near wild rose, so worth looking at for that. All right, I hope that you liked the roundup I chose of the hardiest roses in my collection and my recommendations for cold hardy roses. Please feel free to add your own if you have experience with cold hardy roses into the comments below the video, and if you have any questions, I'll answer them in the same place.